had a conference to attend over the weekend in a small city in upstate New York. Hotels were overpriced and most were fully booked anyway, so I turned to Airbnb. I found a room in a modest house on the edge of town. The reviews were decent, nothing glowing, but nothing alarming. A few people mentioned that the host was attentive and hands-on, but I assumed that just meant he was helpful. The price was cheap, and the listing said the room had a lock on the door. That sealed it for me. I booked the place for 3 nights. The drive-in was uneventful. The neighborhood was quiet. Old trees, wide lawns, mailboxes leaning from years of weather. I found the house easily enough. It was a 2-story place with beige siding and white shutters. A little worn down but neat. I rang the doorbell. The man who opened the door was in his 60s, balding, with a soft belly and a tucked-in flannel shirt. He smiled in a kind but stiff way. "You must be Daniel," he said. "That's me," I said, lifting my suitcase. "Come on in." Shoes off at the door. I stepped in and slipped off my shoes. The inside of the house smelled like boiled vegetables and old books. It wasn't unpleasant, just lived in. "I'm John," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm but a little too long. "Your room's upstairs. Let me show you around." I followed him up a narrow staircase. The carpet was thin and old, but clean. At the end of the hallway was a small bedroom. There was a single bed, a nightstand, a tiny desk, and a closet. Everything was neat and well-made. The window faced the backyard, and a fan sat in the corner. "This is you," he said. "Towels in the closet. Fan works but rattles a bit. Just give it a smack if it gets too loud." "Thanks," I said. "Looks great." "I try to make it nice," he said, standing just inside the doorway. "Some people say I'm too present, but I figure it's better to be helpful than to disappear, right?" "Sure," I said, a little uncertain. I shifted on my feet, waiting for him to leave. Instead, he pointed at the desk. "Wi-Fi password's there. Let me know if it gives you trouble. Oh, and the door does lock from the inside, but I don't have a key for the outside. So don't leave valuables when you're out." "Got it," I said. He nodded but still didn't move. Then, as if he just remembered something, he said, "You like fruit?" Sure. I've got some melon downstairs. I'll bring some up later." I smiled politely. "Thanks." He gave a final nod and left, pulling the door mostly shut behind him. I set my suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs squeaked. I didn't feel unsafe exactly, just observed. I brushed it off. Some people were just overly hospitable. No big deal. I unpacked and went downstairs to ask about the best route to the convention center. He was sitting in the living room reading a book. He leapt up when he saw me. "You settle in okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just wondering if I should drive or take a bus." "Oh, drive for sure," he said. "Buses are irregular and full of weirdos." I nodded and turned toward the kitchen. "Is it okay if I use the fridge?" "Absolutely," he said, following me in. "Just keep stuff on the bottom shelf." I stored a few drinks and some leftovers I'd brought. He stood behind me the whole time, explaining which shelf was best, how the light inside flickered sometimes, how he'd been meaning to defrost the freezer. I said okay a lot and smiled when I didn't know what else to do. Back in my room, I closed the door and locked it. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop to finish up some work. A little after 8 p.m., there was a knock. "Yes," I said. The door opened a crack, and John stepped in, holding a bowl of cut melon and a fork. "Thought you might like a snack," he said. I stood and walked over, taking the bowl. "Thanks, that's kind of you. Want anything to drink? Water? Tea?" "I'm good," I said. He lingered a second longer. "Well, sleep tight. I'm usually up around 6. Coffee's ready by 6:30. "Sounds great," I said. He left and I locked the door again. That night I slept okay. Light creaks from the old house, a fan rattling in the corner. I left for the conference early the next morning and was gone most of the day. When I returned in the late afternoon, I found that my bed had been made. Not just straightened, the sheets had been changed. My toiletries had been rearranged. My laptop charger had been wound up and tucked into a drawer, and a glass of water was sitting on the nightstand. I hadn't asked for any of this. I went downstairs to find John. He was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. "Hey," I said, "did you go in my room?" He looked up and smiled. "Of course, just thought I'd freshen up the place. Hope that's okay." I hesitated. "You didn't need to do that." "I don't mind," he said. "I like looking after people. Gives me something to do." I didn't know how to respond, so I nodded and went back upstairs. I locked the door and sat on the bed, trying to shake the strange feeling growing in my gut. That evening, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway, then breathing, not walking, not shuffling, just breathing, slow, rhythmic, right outside my door. I sat up, heart thudding. The fan masked the sound somewhat, but it was definitely there. I looked at the gap under the door. No shadows, no movement, just the low, repeated sound of someone standing still and breathing deeply. I waited, maybe 30 seconds, a minute, then the sound faded. No footsteps, just gone. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning, I came downstairs later than usual. John was already at the table with 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought I'd make you one," he said. I took the mug and sipped. It was too sweet. "Thanks. Sleep okay?"
Yeah, elite.
"Just tired." He nodded, watching me over the rim of his mug. "I've had guests who don't sleep well here. It's the quiet, I think. Too different from what they're used to." "Maybe," I said. He didn't say anything else, just stared. I went back to the conference that day and tried to focus, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. I kept replaying the moment outside my door. The slow breathing, the silence, the way the sheets had been changed without asking. That night, I made a decision. I locked the door, shoved my suitcase in front of it, and left the light on while I slept. Not the fan, didn't want to miss any sounds. Around 1 a.m., I heard the doorknob rattle. Not hard, just a subtle test. A little twist, then a pause. Then again. I didn't move. My heart thudded so hard I thought I might be sick. I listened. The knob stopped turning. A long pause, then feet padding slowly away on the carpet. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I packed my things and went downstairs with my bag. John was in the kitchen, humming. "You checking out early?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. Something came up. He tilted his head. "Everything okay?" "Just need to head out sooner than expected." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You sure everything's all right?" "Yep," I said quickly. "Thanks for everything." He walked me to the door, hands in his pockets. "You know," he said, "not everyone appreciates hospitality. Some people don't know what it means anymore." I forced a polite smile. "I appreciate it." As I turned to go, he said, "You're a very quiet sleeper. I bet you sleep like a log." I froze for half a second, then walked to my car and drove off without looking back. I never reported him. I probably should have. Maybe it was all harmless, a lonely man trying too hard. But I still think about that night. The breathing, the rattle of the knob, the sheets being changed without a word. Sometimes kindness has edges, and sometimes the person watching over you isn't doing it to be kind at all. I've been traveling for work more frequently lately. Quick trips to random cities I'd never visited, 2 nights here, 3 nights there. Hotels were becoming bland, overpriced, and full of noise, so I started booking Airbnbs instead. I liked the illusion of privacy, the quiet, the freedom to cook my own meals if I felt like it. Most of the time, it worked out just fine. This one was in a small town in the Midwest. I don't even remember the name now, but it was the sort of place that gets swallowed by snow for 6 months and breathes cornfields in the summer. I was scheduled to meet with a client who ran a machinery parts business, and I only needed a place to sleep 2 nights. I found the listing late at night, scrolling with one hand, spooning cold takeout with the other. "Private studio apartment above garage," it said. Price was decent. The pictures showed clean white walls, wood floors, a small kitchenette, and a single bed under a skylight. The host had good reviews. People said she was responsive, quiet, respectful. I booked it without thinking twice. When I arrived the next evening, the sun had already dipped behind the bare trees. The wind was sharp, the kind that slices through your clothes and leaves you wondering if your car's battery will die overnight. I pulled into the driveway of a modest suburban house. The host wasn't around, but she'd left clear instructions. A keypad lockbox by the stairs, a key inside. The studio was above the detached garage out back. The stairs creaked as I climbed. There was a motion sensor light at the top that flickered as I walked past it, then steadied. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It was exactly like the pictures, clean, sparse, and a little too white. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, like someone had scrubbed every surface just an hour before I arrived. I dropped my bag near the door, kicked off my boots, and let the warmth from the baseboard heaters settle over me. I made some tea with the electric kettle, opened my laptop, and started catching up on emails. Everything was normal, peaceful. Then I noticed the vents. One was above the kitchenette, long, horizontal, and covered with a thin mesh. It didn't seem connected to anything. No heat came from it, no breeze. I walked over and held my hand to it. Nothing. The second vent was in the bathroom just above the mirror. Same story, silent, cold, but something about them bothered me. They weren't duct vents, at least not like any I'd seen before. There was no ductwork visible, and the mesh looked cheap, like the kind you'd find in a speaker cover or maybe on a camera. I tapped the one in the bathroom. Hollow. I let it go. Figured it was probably old design or some weird Midwestern construction quirk. I wasn't in the mood to invent problems. I took a long shower, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. The skylight showed a cloudless sky. No streetlights, no planes overhead. Just the cold pinholes of stars and the occasional whisper of wind rattling the gutters. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was nothing. I just remember going from deep sleep to full alert, lying on my side in that little bed, staring at the ceiling. My skin was cold, not from temperature, more like adrenaline. I listened. There it was, a sound, quiet, shuffling, not loud enough to be footsteps, but not random either, like something brushing against wood, or fabric moving over flooring. I sat up, heart pounding. The sound stopped. It had come from above me or maybe beside me. I wasn't sure. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Nothing. I turned on the bedside light, looked around. Nothing out of place. I got up and checked the door. Locked. Windows. Locked. The bathroom vent caught my eye again. Still dark. Still empty. I stared at it for too long. I went back to bed, leaving the light on. The next morning, I went through the motions. Met the client. Had the meeting. Nodded at the right times. Smiled when needed. But the whole time I had this weight in my chest. Like something was wrong and I couldn't name it. When I returned to the Airbnb that afternoon, the sun was still up. I walked around the unit trying to see what was bothering me. The studio was basically a rectangle. Bed and kitchenette on one side, bathroom on the other, a closet next to the front door. I opened the closet, expecting the usual broom, vacuum, hangers. Instead, it was empty, except the back panel looked wrong. The rest of the closet was painted white, just like the apartment. But the panel at the back was unpainted plywood, screwed in unevenly, with one corner chipped away. I touched it. It moved. Not much, just a tiny shift, like it wasn't screwed in tight. I pressed harder. The panel popped inward slightly, enough for me to get my fingers behind it. I hesitated, then pulled. Came loose with a dry creak. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, maybe 3 feet deep, 4 feet wide, enough for someone to sit in if they crouched. Inside was a folded sleeping bag, a plastic water bottle, paperback novel with no cover, and a single black high-top sneaker. There was no dust, none. Everything was clean, used. My whole body froze. I stepped back and dropped the panel. It didn't shut all the way, just hung there, tilted forward slightly, like it was daring me to look again. I paced the apartment. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a storage space. Maybe the host's kid used to play in there. Maybe someone squatted here between guests. Or maybe someone was still using it. My stomach turned. I packed my bag fast. I didn't even zip it. Just shoved clothes in, unplugged my laptop, grabbed my phone. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take a final look. As I was locking the door behind me, I thought I heard something move inside. A soft click, like pressure shifting, or weight being lifted from a wooden floor. I didn't stop to check. I drove 2 towns over and checked into a roadside motel. It was dirty, the sheets were stiff, and the shower had hair in the drain. But I slept, deeply. The next morning, I opened the Airbnb app to message the host. I didn't know what I was going to say. I stared at the listing. It was gone. No studio above garage. No host named Sarah. The message thread still existed, but when I tapped her profile, it showed user no longer available. I scrolled through my emails and found the reservation confirmation. Clicked the link. This listing is no longer available. I never heard from her again. I didn't report it to Airbnb. I probably should have, but I told myself they wouldn't care. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to explain the crawl space, the vent, the sneaker. Months later, I saw a TikTok where a woman found a camera hidden in a smoke detector in her rental. People were sharing stories about hidden microphones, peepholes, things they found tucked away in closets and ceilings. I thought about those vents. Sometimes, when I'm staying somewhere new, I still check every closet. I knock on the walls. I shine my flashlight into every vent. And every now and then, I catch myself staring too long at the shadows, waiting for them to blink. I needed to get away. Between work stress, city noise, and the endless blur of emails and notifications, I was desperate for a break. Not a vacation, just some silence. A couple of days off-grid. Somewhere quiet, surrounded by trees. Somewhere I could hear myself think. Maybe write a little, sleep a lot, and go back home not feeling like a husk of a person. I found the cabin on Airbnb late one night after scrolling through what felt like hundreds of listings. It was in western North Carolina, just on the edge of the Smoky Mountains. The pictures showed a small log cabin tucked between tall pines. There was a little porch with a rocking chair, a fire pit, and what looked like miles of untouched woods all around. It was described as secluded, but it mentioned a shared driveway at the bottom of the listing. That detail gave me a little pause, but the reviews were good. People said it was peaceful, cozy, even magical. So I booked it for 3 nights. I left Friday morning, drove 6 hours from Atlanta. The last hour was a winding 2-lane highway that turned into gravel roads. The trees grew denser, thicker. No cell signal by the time I was within 10 miles. That felt good, actually, like a clean break from everything. Eventually, I turned onto the shared driveway. It was more like a dirt path, just wide enough for one vehicle. Deep ruts and soft patches of mud made the climb up the hill slow and careful. The trees closed in on either side, thick and shadowy even in the afternoon sun. Halfway up, I passed an old mailbox with 2 names scratched into the rusted metal. I slowed down to read them, W. Carter/G. Carter. Figured the owners probably lived nearby. Seemed normal enough. The driveway split briefly, one branch veering down toward a smaller path, the other curving up toward the cabin. I took the upper path and soon saw the cabin appear between the trees. Exactly like the pictures. Wood smoke in the air, moss on the rocks, silence all around. I parked next to the porch, stepped out, and just stood there for a moment, breathing it in. It felt like the kind of place you'd read about in a book. Simple, still untouched by the mess of modern life. I carried my bags inside. It was one room. Bed, small kitchen, with stove, a bathroom off to the side. Cozy and clean. Someone had stacked firewood neatly on the porch. A guest book on the counter was filled with people thanking the host for the most peaceful weekend of our lives. It was almost too perfect. I spent that first evening reading on the porch. Just me, a blanket, a mug of tea, and the sounds of leaves rustling and birds calling. No traffic, no voices, no noise at all. It was exactly what I needed, until the truck showed up. It was just after dusk. I had gone inside to start a fire and was setting a pot of water on the stove when I heard tires on gravel outside. The driveway was long enough that I could hear it before I could see anything. I stepped onto the porch. A pickup truck was pulling up the driveway. Old Ford. Blue, faded, the kind of truck that had seen too many winters. Stopped about 10 feet behind my car. The engine rumbled low for a few seconds, then shut off. The driver didn't get out. I waited. He just sat there. Engine off, headlights off, window rolled down. I couldn't make out his face from where I was standing, just a shape in the cab. I gave a short wave. Nothing. No movement at all. I waited another minute, then went inside, locked the door, stood near the window and watched. The truck didn't move for 15 minutes. Then, without any warning, the engine started again. Headlights flicked on, and it slowly reversed back down the driveway. No rush, no panic, just quiet and slow. Then it was gone. I barely slept that night, kept the porch light on, kept checking the window. Every creak of the wood outside made my skin tighten. I kept trying to tell myself that maybe it was a neighbor. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he thought the cabin was empty. Maybe. The next morning, everything looked normal again. Trees, fog, birds. I made coffee and sat on the porch, trying to shake the unease from the night before. Around noon, I texted the host, even though I didn't have much signal. The message barely went through. I said something like, "Hey, someone came up the driveway last night in a blue pickup. Just wondering if that's normal? Maybe a neighbor?" About 20 minutes later, I got a reply, "Yeah, that's my cousin. He lives down the hill. Sometimes he checks the driveway for fallen branches or ruts after it rains." Harmless. I didn't love that answer, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I stayed put the rest of the day. Read more, walked a little through the woods behind the cabin, cooked dinner. By the time it got dark, I had almost convinced myself everything was fine. Then, around 9:30 p.m., I saw headlights through the trees. Not on the driveway, though, through the woods. They were far off, but I could see them. Two beams of light flickering between the trunks. Moving slowly, they went out after a minute. Just cut off completely. No sound, no engine, no movement. I stared into the dark for a long time after that. Never saw them again. I didn't text the host again. I just locked all the doors and sat in bed with my flashlight close. Then came night 3. It was cold that evening, colder than the others. I built a good fire in the stove and tried to let it all go. I told myself it was just rural life. People drive weird places out here. I just wasn't used to it. It was about 11 p.m. when I heard the gravel again. This time I didn't go to the window. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark. I could hear the truck pulling in, slow and steady, the crunch of tires on stones. Then silence. I waited. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. I finally crawled to the side window and peeked through the edge of the curtain. Same blue truck, same spot, parked just 10 feet behind my car. Lights off, no movement, except this time the driver's side door was open. I couldn't see anyone. I watched for a long time. My heart was pounding. I was too scared to take a photo, too scared to turn on a light. It felt like whoever it was could see me if I moved too much. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the door closed. The engine didn't start. No tires, no lights. The truck was just gone, like it disappeared into the woods without a sound. I didn't sleep at all that night. When the sky finally started to lighten, I packed up my bags, tossed everything into the car, and left without breakfast. I didn't even bother cleaning up or taking the trash out. Just got in and drove. On the way down the driveway, I looked for the lower path I had seen when I first arrived, the one that veered down the hill. I took it just to see. It curved steeply down into a clearing, and there was the blue pickup, parked in front of a small trailer with a crooked porch. No other cars, no sound. I didn't stop, didn't get out. I just turned the wheel, backed up as fast as I could without getting stuck in the mud, and took off down the main road. When I got to a gas station about 20 miles away, I sat in the parking lot for a long time. My hands were still shaking. I opened Airbnb, pulled up the listing, and looked through the reviews again. I hadn't noticed it before, but one reviewer from 6 months back had written, "Great cabin. Weird neighbor showed up in the driveway one night and just stared at us. Kinda spooky, but overall a great stay. 5 stars. I never left a review, never filed a complaint. What would I even say? The cousin looked at me funny? It was technically all normal. No laws broken, no confrontation. But I've never felt that level of raw physical vulnerability before, like prey in an open field. I haven't booked a remote cabin since. I still want to, but something in me hesitates now every time I see a listing with the words, shared driveway. Just 2 words, but now I understand how much can be hidden behind them. I had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. The idea of escaping the city, even just for a couple of days, felt like the perfect remedy for the stress that had built up over months. I'd scoured Airbnb listings for something that felt special. Away from the crowded tourist spots, quiet but charming, with a bit of character. When I found the little cottage tucked away in a rural area about 2 hours from my apartment, I knew it was exactly what I needed. The photos showed a quaint, weathered house with ivy crawling up one side, a small porch with a swing, and big windows letting in lots of light. The inside looked cozy and clean, with rustic wooden furniture and a fireplace. It seemed like the kind of place where I could read a few books, make some coffee in the morning, and just breathe. The host was friendly enough during our brief messages, quick to respond and eager to share local tips for restaurants and hiking trails nearby. Nothing unusual there. I arrived just as the sun was dipping, casting long shadows across the gravel driveway. The cottage sat by itself at the end of a narrow road lined with tall pines. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and damp earth, the quiet punctuated only by distant birds. It was peaceful in a way the city never could be. I opened the front door and stepped inside, setting my bags down on the worn rug. The place was exactly as the photos showed, clean, simple, and inviting. A small kitchen to the left, a living area with a couch and a fireplace straight ahead, and a hallway leading to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. I immediately noticed one of the bedroom doors was locked from the inside. It was an old-fashioned wooden door with a simple keyhole. I assumed it was just storage, as the host had mentioned in the listing description. I looked around for the key but found nothing on the kitchen counter, the table, or the little shelf by the door. When I texted the host to ask about the locked room, the reply came almost instantly. "That room is just for storage, no worries. We keep it locked because it's full of old stuff and furniture. No key there, sorry." The casual tone was meant to reassure me, but the locked door gnawed at my curiosity. After unpacking and settling in, I decided to explore the surrounding area. The house was at the edge of a small rural community, with a few other cottages and farms spread out nearby. I walked down the gravel road, waving at a couple of neighbors tending their gardens or walking dogs. The place was quiet, but not lifeless. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a small farmhouse a few houses down. An older woman was outside, pruning her roses. I didn't expect to find anyone talkative, but somehow, I ended up asking her about the house I was staying in, especially about that locked room. She hesitated, her eyes flicking away for a moment before she spoke, her voice low and careful. Apparently, the previous guest who stayed in the cottage had vanished without explanation a year ago. The room I'd seen locked was supposedly where that guest's belongings had been left behind, and after the disappearance, no one had used it again. The neighbor's nervous glance told me she wasn't comfortable sharing much more, but what she said was enough to set off alarm bells in my mind. I thanked her and walked back to the cottage, the sun lowering behind the trees. The light shifted, and the quiet around me seemed heavier. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks, but the feeling of being watched settled in deep. That night was restless. I kept hearing strange sounds from behind the locked door, the the faintest thumps, like something heavy being moved, and whispers that I couldn't quite catch but definitely weren't part of the normal creaks or groans old houses make. I didn't dare open the door to check. I tried to tell myself it was the wind or animals outside, but the sounds came with a rhythm and volume that didn't fit. I checked the entire cottage thoroughly, looking for any signs of cameras or something that might explain the feeling that I wasn't alone. There was nothing. No wires, no devices, no hidden speakers, just old walls and furniture. I even checked the windows and doors to make sure everything was locked and secure. Nothing seemed out of place, but I couldn't shake the sensation that someone was watching me. It wasn't a general unease. It was very specific, like eyes following me from the other side of that locked door. Every time I passed the hallway, my steps slowed and my heart raced a little faster. Morning came, but the relief I'd hoped for never arrived. When I tried to contact the host to check out early, my calls and messages went unanswered. Not just for a few minutes, but for hours. I sat in the kitchen, phone in hand, pacing between the living room and hallway, feeling trapped. The neighbor I'd spoken to the day before appeared around mid-morning. She looked concerned when I told her I couldn't reach the host and that I wanted to leave immediately. Without much discussion, she offered to drive me into town. The ride felt surreal. The quiet countryside I'd admired just hours earlier now felt like a trap. The neighbor mentioned, without much detail, that local police had visited the cottage since the last guest disappeared, but nothing ever came of it. There was no proof, no clues, no explanations. When I got back to the city, I contacted Airbnb right away to report what had happened. I explained the locked room, the strange noises, the host's sudden silence, and the unsettling stories from the neighbor. Airbnb was surprisingly responsive and launched an investigation, removing the listing and blocking the host's account pending further review. Looking back, I realized how blind I had been to the subtle signs. The locked door should have been a bigger red flag from the start. The host's casual dismissal was suspicious in hindsight, and the way they disappeared when I needed answers was terrifying. The cottage, which had promised a peaceful retreat, turned into a nightmare of uncertainty. I never found out exactly what happened in that locked room or what became of the missing guest, but I know I was lucky to get out when I did. Since then, I've been much more cautious about where I stay and who I trust online. Sometimes, the most charming places hide the darkest secrets, and not everything is as simple as it seems on a screen. I had booked the Airbnb on a whim. I was tired of the usual hotels when traveling for work, and I thought it would be more comfortable to have a small place of my own, even if just for a few days. The listing looked perfect, an old but well-maintained house on the outskirts of a small town, about 2 hours from the city. The photos showed a cozy living room with a fireplace, a modest kitchen, and a small backyard surrounded by tall trees. It wasn't flashy or fancy, but it had character, and the price was right. I arrived just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted with orange and purple hues, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. The house was even better in person, weathered with siding, a creaky porch swing, and the faint sound of birds settling down for the night. The host had sent me a lockbox code for the key, so I didn't meet anyone in person, but that was fine by me. I like my space and privacy. The inside smelled faintly of wood polish and something else I couldn't place. I dropped my bags in the living room and wandered around. The floorboards creaked under my feet, and the windows showed the forest outside, thick and darkening. I lit the fireplace. It was one of those old-fashioned ones with a metal grate, and soon the room filled with warmth and the crackling sound of burning logs. The kitchen was tiny but clean. I unpacked a few snacks and settled in for the night. The first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No city hum, no distant cars or people talking. Just silence, except for the occasional rustle of leaves outside or a bird's call far away. I figured I'd read for a bit before bed. Around 10, I heard a noise from the backyard. It was soft, like footsteps on dead leaves or dry twigs snapping. I paused, listening closely. The sound stopped. I told myself it was probably an animal. Deer or raccoons are common around here. I wasn't worried, but the noise lingered in my mind. I got up and pulled the curtains shut. The windows were tall and thin, making the whole place feel a bit like a dollhouse. I checked the locks on the doors. Everything was tight. I sat back down, but the feeling of being watched had settled deep in my chest. I told myself it was nothing. The next day, I planned to work from the Airbnb. I had my laptop and a pile of documents to go through. The house had decent Wi-Fi, though a little slow, which was expected in a rural area. The sunlight streamed in through the kitchen window as I sat at the small table, typing away. Outside, the forest was alive with the sound of birds and a light breeze. By late afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I wanted to stretch my legs and see the area. There was a narrow dirt road that led away from the house and into the woods. The trees were tall, mostly pines and oaks, and the ground was carpeted with fallen leaves and pine needles. The air was cool and fresh. After about 30 minutes, I turned back. On my way, I thought I caught a glimpse of someone standing between the trees. They didn't move, and I couldn't see their face clearly. When I blinked, they were gone. I brushed it off as my imagination. Back at the house, the sun was starting to dip low again. I fixed a simple dinner and ate on the porch. The swing creaked slightly in the breeze. The house felt comfortable, but the quietness was starting to press in on me. That night, the noises from outside got louder. It wasn't just footsteps on leaves now. There were thumps, sometimes a scraping sound against the side of the house, like someone running their hand or an object along the wood siding. I checked the security camera footage I'd set up on my phone, just a basic doorbell cam the host recommended for safety, but it showed nothing unusual. I kept the lights on until I finally fell asleep. On the third day, I woke up early to the sound of something heavy hitting the back door. It made me jump. I stayed still for a moment, heart racing, then got up to check. The door was locked, but there was a dent in the wood panel near the handle. It looked like something had been thrown against it with force. I called the host's number, but it went straight to voicemail. The neighborhood was too small for a police station, and I wasn't sure if calling the sheriff was necessary. Still, the feeling of unease was growing. I decided to go into town to get some food and maybe find a cafe where I could work. The town was small, just a few streets with a gas station, a diner, and a couple of convenience stores. I asked around if anyone had seen strange people around the woods near the house, but nobody had noticed anything unusual. Still, I didn't feel safe going back to the house alone as night fell. I grabbed a few essentials, including a pepper spray I found in the glove compartment of my car. Better safe than sorry. That night, I slept with the door locked and a chair wedged under the doorknob for extra security. The noises didn't stop. Around 2 a.m., I heard a loud banging on the front door, then the back door, then windows. I stayed frozen under the covers, heart pounding. When the banging stopped, everything went quiet again. I didn't dare look outside. Morning came slowly. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was intact but shaken. My phone battery was low, and the Wi-Fi was spotty. I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed quickly, took a last look around the house, and left without even locking the door behind me. Back in the city, I told myself it was just someone messing with a stranger's house. Nothing more. But the thought that someone had been watching me, or worse, waiting for me in that silent forest, stayed with me. I never stayed at an Airbnb alone in a remote place again. And I never ignored those small, creeping feelings of something being off. Sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters. They're just real people and real situations you never expected to face.